I would like to recall that of all the writers, even those that came before you were the only one that Chinua Achebe singled out for a very high praise. You know, he said Chimamanda is a writer with the gift of ancient storytellers, and she came almost fully made. Looking at what Chinua Achebe said and your career trajectory, you know, since the publication of Half of a Yellow Sun, you know, it's very clear that he was very prophetic. And that makes me wonder, when you look at Chinua Achebe's career and yours, are there meeting points? Are there agreements, the trajectory of your careers? Do you find yourself obsessed by the same curiosities, the same anxieties?
No, well, first of all, I think that as a creative person, what one wants more than anything else is a feeling of uniqueness. Right? So I think that, and also in general, I don't really spend my time wondering how I'm similar to other writers or not. But I do think that, look, Achebe was a great man. Achebe personified greatness in his work and as a human being. And I also don't like to do a lot of self-analysis, but this was my hope. My hope is that the way that he lived his life with integrity, he told his stories truthfully, and he had a deep, abiding love for his people and from where he came from. And I find that deeply moving and admirable. I think if anything both of us were supposed to become doctors, and we fled medicine. So that is one similarity.
Okay, the next question, I'm afraid I'll have to take a direct quote from Chinua Achebe himself, where he talked about the balance of stories. He said, and this is really what I personally wish this century to see, a balance of stories where every people will be able to contribute to a definition of themselves, where we are not victims of that people's accounts. And I wonder, would you say that this has come to pass in our own time? Do we have anything that comes close to a balance of stories?
It has changed. We're not quite there yet. We still have a little way to go. But I think that in terms of storytelling and in terms of the stories told about Africans, more Africans are telling African stories. And of course, that's a good thing. But I think there's still a bit of a ways to go. I remember when I first, so with Purple Hibiscus, the first novel that I wrote, and I was trying to get a publisher in the US, and I started sending the manuscript out. And I got many, many rejections. I think it's important for the young people here to hear that story, that if you want to become something and you want to do something with your life, just because you get rejected is not a reason to stop. You keep pushing, you keep going, you keep trying. I got 25 rejections. Yes, and I counted, and I still have them as evidence. in my drawer. I was sending out the manuscript, and I was getting these rejections back. And I remember that many of them said, "We cannot sell you because you're not like anybody else." And the publishing industry really likes the idea of saying, this new writer is like somebody else who's already known and published. And so at the time, there was really no contemporary African who was writing contemporary stories and was published or well-known in the US. The last writer that they knew of who was well-known was Chinua Achebe. But Chinua Achebe's stories were about pre-colonial Africa. I was writing about contemporary small-town Nigeria I had thrown in Igbo words in the story. I had made no attempts to simplify things for people to understand easily. So I got up many of these rejections, but I kept trying. I kept trying because I believe in trying. And so I want to say to the young people here, keep trying because you never know. Before you give up, make sure that you have put in more than 7,000% before you give up. Before you give up, you need to keep pushing. So imagine what it's like. You go every day, and this was before email was common. This was in 2001, 2002. And when you sent out your manuscript, you would include the self-addressed envelope so that they could send their response back to you. So that, in other words, they didn't have to waste their money if they wanted to say no to you. So imagine what it was like for me. I was a student at the time, and every day I'll come back from school, I'll go to the mailbox, my heart pounding. And then I would see an envelope in my own handwriting. So I knew that it came from an agent or a publisher that I had sent my manuscript to. And then I'd open it, my hands shaking, hoping for good news, and it was bad news. Over and over again, 25 times. So I don't want to hear any complaining from young people saying, I tried something 2 times, I did not succeed. You have to keep trying. You have to keep trying. And so one day, finally, it was good news. And I will tell you what the woman wrote. First, she said, I like your writing. The story is interesting. But nobody knows Nigeria. Nobody's going to buy a book about what you're writing about. You're not like anybody else writing, but I will take a chance on you. And that's how my publishing journey began. My first book was published by a small publishing house that didn't have much of a budget, but they believed in the story. And the book was published. I was told not to have high expectations because the Purple Hibiscus is set in Nsukka and Enugu. It's not even Lagos that some Americans have at least heard about. But the book became an independent bestseller with very little publicity because the bookshops, what happened was that the independent bookshops was hand-selling the book. So the bookshop owners had read it. So if people came into the bookshop, they would say to them, read this book. It's different, but read it. And that's how it became an independent bestseller. And that's also what made other publishers then become interested in publishing the next thing that I wrote. And so for me, it is important, especially for us in this country, especially for you young people. I know many of you here are talented. Many of you here have dreams. Some of you have put your dreams in your pockets because you think there's no point. Bring it out of your pocket and try. And so I will tell you the title of my novel, and I will modify it for you. Don't ever forget that your dreams count. Your dreams count. Modified.
Wow. Odelo Waba. If I get to win Yalani, but as I in a dream count. Okay, now let's talk about dream count. To my mind, it's your most audacious book ever. Both in scope, the scope of the narrative, and what you tried to do, and the way you wanted to carry everybody along, the multiple characters, and everything about the book. I need not talk about, the brilliance of the writing. I'm a sucker for language. So when I began to read it, it was the first thing that struck me. I said, wow, she's back. But I wonder, when I read the book, it's the story of 4 women, and we see them at various stages of their development, and there is a ring of irony that encircles the 4 women, in the sense that even at the height of their power, there was some level of emptiness, and it made me feel sad. So what really is the issue? It seems to me, to point at, a longing, and the pursuit of fulfillment. And at the end of the day, they didn't come off as, fulfilled. So are you trying to pass a commentary on life and its many, many unfulfilled aspirations and dreams?
No. I quarrel with your reading. I quarrel with your analysis. You're wrong. It's not. So, on your go dream count, go on your phone. No, what if I So, okay, you know what? I'm joking. I mean, I think it's a fair interpretation, but it's not one that I agree with. I think it's also a question of I think we all long, there's a longing, I think, at the heart of life. Right? I think life, in the end, is a certain longing. We long for joy, we long for meaning, we long for love. And the characters are all different. I wouldn't agree that there's an emptiness there. I think maybe what we can talk about is how differently we can define fulfillment, right? But I think also that maybe something at play is a certain Nigerian approach to life. We Nigerians were very pragmatic. And that pragmatism can sometimes bleed into something close to hard-heartedness, something close to an impatience with the softer things. So I've noticed that for my Nigerian readers, the character of Chia, who is a very dreamy person, she's almost everybody who's spoken to me about her in Nigeria. One person said to me, "Is she okay? Is she all right?" And then many of them have said, what type of, Ebuka Obiuchendu on stage in Lagos called Chia, very silly girl. But on the other hand, my American readers, oh my God, she's such a dreamer. And they say this with approval. So I sense that what might be at play is a certain Nigerian worldview, and also in some ways, a longing for a Nigerian need for clarity. Yes, and sometimes literature doesn't provide clarity. So I would say that my characters, at least most of them, find a certain kind. Zikora does not, I will agree with that. But I think the others, I've actually felt that this is my happiest ending of all of my work. Half of a Yellow Sun, we all know how it ended. Kita fa babalo mumba sim kedebe kainene no oya jukwana mo oya jukwana maka kainene amaro mebo no. But I felt that this was an ending that had some hope.
Well, okay. Let's leave that there. I was struck by the sheer attention to detail in sculpting the character of Kadiatu. And what seemed to be a very intense research into Guinea, the Guinean way of life, the things, you led me into a new world. I didn't know anything about Guinea. You went, even their political history, everything was reflected. We brought that to bear on the character of Kadiatu. You endeared her to me. Okay, yeah, you succeeded. It was a brilliant one. But it leaves me wondering, especially considering that character is modeled, Kadiatu is modeled after a real-life character, Did you find it easy to create Kadiatu?
No, Kadiatu was the most difficult character to write. Kadiatu's section was the section that in which I did the most rewriting and editing. Because for the reasons that you've said, I'm writing about a character who's not Nigerian. And when you're writing what you know. There is a kind of unconscious authority you bring to your storytelling. If I'm writing a Nigerian character, um, I, I don't really question my. There's a certain authority I bring to the storytelling because I know I know this country. I get it. At least I know southern Nigeria. I don't know northern Nigeria as well, and so I bring an authority to the storytelling. I don't question myself. But I was writing about a country I knew little about, Guinea, and so I did a lot of research. And sometimes the problem with research when you're writing fiction is you have to be careful not to let the research overwhelm the fiction. And this was also something I had to keep in mind for Half of a Yellow Sun. Because I read so much, I had so many notes, I looked at so many archives that you're tempted to show off how much you have learned of. And then it no longer becomes centered on the character. So with Kajiatu, I think the first draft was just full of all my research. I read political books. I also read some novels because it's important to kind of get the texture. And I talked to many people from Guinea. And so I rewrote her quite a few times. And also because this character is based on a real person. I mean, loosely, of course. I mean, I invented her history. I felt a sense of responsibility. I felt that there are people, so the real person on whom this character is based, her name is Nafisatu Jallo, and she's a Guinean woman who lives in the US, and she worked in New York as a hotel maid. And in 2011, she accused Dominique Strauss-Kahn of sexual assault. And at the time, Dominique Strauss-Kahn was the head of the International Monetary Fund, and he was also believed to be the next president of France. So he was a very important man, and she was a lowly hotel maid, and he assaulted her sexually. And, and the coverage that followed, which I followed very closely, was really, really important to me on a number of levels. I really admired America, that a big man was being held to account. But of course, her case was very quickly dropped, and it was dropped because the prosecutor said that she had lied on her asylum application many years before, which infuriated me and wounded my spirit. But not just because of Nafisatu Jallo, because of women in general, because I felt that the message that was being sent to women is that if you want to get justice after you've been sexually assaulted, then you better be an angel. You better be a saint. You better not have told one single lie in your life. And I don't know anybody here who has never told one lie. Please don't lie by saying that you've never told one lie. Please. So what we're being told then is you cannot get justice. You accuse somebody of a crime, and suddenly it becomes about you instead of the person you've accused. But anyway, I wrote about it at the time, to say about it, and I think I carried this woman's story in my heart because of what it meant to so many other women. So when I started Dream Count, this character came to me. I wanted to humanize her. I hope that readers will go away remembering that a woman you read about in situations of this sort is still a human being. She's a human being, and it's important to remember that. But I didn't want her to be a saint. I think it's important that we remember that nobody's perfect. We're all flawed. So I wanted to strike that balance between a flawed human being who also happens to be remarkable in her quiet wisdom, her quiet strength, her common sense. Yes, unlike Chia. Yes, unlike Chia, who's sort of dreaming through life. And Kajiatu is just like, what sort of nonsense is this? Yes, very grounded, yes. So that's why she was difficult to write. I haven't met Nafisatu Jallo. No, I don't know her. Everything was based on public information about her. But I think I might reach out to her now that I've written the novel.
It's important. One more question. And then probably at a stage, we'll take one or two questions from the audience if they are interested. Otherwise, we would fire on. Now, reading Dream Count, I noticed that I think there was something like a deliberate attempt to represent, the complexity that is Nigeria. Almost every tribe has a character representing them. Even in your books, in your previous works, we didn't get to read characters from the northern part of the country. But, there was this woman in Dream Count, a liberated Hausa Fulani woman, that imposed herself on the narrative so formidably that you couldn't ignore her character after reading Dream Count. So why was that a deliberate attempt to give everybody a sense of belonging? I just want to know.
I'm happy. I really like how you describe the character of Hawa. Imposes herself formidably. Yes, that I like that one. I will not quarrel with. I don't know. Was it deliberate? I suppose yes. I think all the choices I made in some ways are deliberate, but it was. I think it just reflects my interest. Of course, I think it's fairly obvious here. My sense of identity as an Igbo woman is very strong. It is central to who I am. But at the same time, I also have, I have a very Pan-African sense of, I call myself an emotional Pan-African. I feel very strongly about not just Africa, but all the peoples of African descent. I care about their fate. And Nigeria is important to me. Nigeria is a country with so many problems, and I often half joke, I didn't ask to be Nigerian, but this is what they gave me. So I wanted to do well. I want Nigeria to succeed. I want us to have a better sense of unity in our diversity. I want us to know one another better. And I also am just genuinely curious about different Nigerian cultures. And so if you notice in the book, there are many characters, and they're all small side characters, but they're characters from very small ethnic groups. I'm very fascinated by the untold stories of the smaller ethnic groups in this country. I find it very interesting. Growing up, we thought the North was a monolith. The Hausa, everybody was. But you start to learn about the individual ethnic groups, their stories, their triumphs. And I personally find it very moving. So that was part of my way of, I suppose, just a very subtle celebration of the possibility of unity. And I should say as well that there are characters who have names from Northern Cross River, particularly from a wonderful town called Itigidi. I won't say more.
And the amazing medical doctor who showed up.
There is in Dream Count a wonderful character. That character is the best gynecologist at the University of Nigeria Teaching Hospital. That character is loved by all his patients. And that character is based on a true person, a man who I'm so proud to call my father-in-law, Dr. Nkanwe Sege. So you're a very careful reader.
I enjoy your reading. I enjoy whatever you have written. And, I wouldn't let you go without asking you this question, because you also have confessed elsewhere that when you're not writing, you find yourself reading poetry. And, when I read your works, I see a lot of poetry in what you write. And the other day, I did a workshop at the festival in our reimagined Umofia, where I looked at, the poetry of Things Fall Apart, because I began to actually see, what you guys, in fact, I've discovered your secret, so make I tell you now.
Okay. What is the secret?
You people you and Chino Achebe, you put so much poetry in your writing that, the brilliance leaves people coming back. You read and you want to come back and read again. So please, what place does poetry have in your writing? Does it have a place at all?
Yes.
Does it in any way creep into you, maybe unconsciously, even when you write?
I hope so.
Okay.
But I think what I would say is that the role of poetry in my writing is the role of teacher. Poetry teaches me. Poetry reminds me of the magic of language. And I think that Dream Count is finally the book in which I let loose. I I didn't hold back. I think I let my love of language show, and that love of language comes from poetry. When I'm writing fiction, I don't like to read fiction because I'm worried about sounding like the writer I'm reading. So instead, I read poetry, a lot of poetry when I'm writing fiction. And in general, I prefer to read anthologies just so that there are different voices in my head rather than reading singular collections when I'm writing fiction. And as a reader, I find that I appreciate a fiction writer who pays attention to language. And it's so interesting what you say about Things Fall Apart, the poetry of it, because I reread Things Fall Apart because of this festival. And I hadn't read it in a number of years. And reading it with new eyes, you see new things. There's this red in tooth and claw is a line. Do you remember that line? I think it's when Achebe is describing. No, claw.
Okay.
Yes. Should we check?
No, you're right. You're right. I remember that line.
I was struck by that.
Yeah.
But also the music of his sentences. And there's a sentence that will always move me to just great emotion in Things Fall Apart. And it's about Kunkwo's father. When they carried him away, he took with him his flute. That sentence is so beautiful in its simplicity and its power.
That's why, when you see sculpted sentences like that, I read them as poetry because they are stripped to bare bones and they shine, they glitter in the dark. So sometimes and I've noticed it, there was even a portion of Dream Count, like almost 2 passages that were, to my mind, absolute gorgeous poetry. Maybe some other time Please. I'll show you.
Okay.
Because...
But whatever section it is, I agree with you.
Okay. Now, how well is Dream Count doing in terms of numbers since March? This is the final question, anyway.
No, honestly, but I have to say that what I feel most about Dream Count is gratitude. I feel so grateful every day since Dream Count came out. Okay. I'm grateful that I finished the book. Yeah. I'm grateful. I wasn't sure. I haven't written a novel in 10 years. So I felt that I was going into new territory. Publishing has changed in that time. So I wasn't sure how Dream Count would be received. But Dream Count was an instant bestseller in the UK, in the US, in France, in Germany, and in Nigeria. Where is Dr. Imasue? Dr. Imasue we should ask Dr. Imasue, my publisher. But of course, we know that many people have stories of, I've been looking for Dream Count, I've not found it, such as you. So it's doing very well. It's finding its readers, and I am so grateful. Good evening. So happy to meet you. The great Osofia. This man is an icon for us.
and the greatest Omelowa and Okulowa. Look, I've been meaning to shake her hands because of her books. But listening to her, after listening, I just felt like hugging her. And that was what I did. Thank you for what you represent. Thank you for everything you do. Keep it up. I noticed that you are just yourself. No pretenses. She's just there. No apologies to anybody. Just like me. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
My name is Adichie. I happen to be the chairman of this occasion. And before I go into my question, I wanted to thank you for that remark you made about the number of times you tried and failed before succeeding. 25 times, and then in 26 it worked. It takes me back to my time in New York in the 1991 when I left from Oxford to go to New York City to try and get a job as an investment banker. and I must have written 110 applications to get a job in Wall Street. And I have in my file in my house in Lagos 110 rejection letters. But I didn't give up, and I ultimately succeeded. And that shows tenacity. And that's one thing young people don't realize. These days, people tell me they've tried, and they've only tried 3 times, and they have not really tried enough. I have the distinguished pleasure of having read your book, Dream Count. I actually bought 2 copies. My wife took one. She lives in Rotterdam. I have one. I have it in Lagos. My question is around the character Omelogo. She's a banker. I'm a banker. And then she suddenly leaves banking with all, obviously, her character as a banker wasn't quite saintly. That's the word I will use it. And then she decides to leave and sort of becomes like a Robin Hood of the modern time, taking the money she's stealing from her boss and other people and helping women. And then moves on to go and do this master's in, so let me call it social studies. Pornography. So it's a very confusing character. I was struggling to reconcile it, and maybe the only redeeming act for me, was when she started to help her Kadiatu in the court case, and I was hoping that Kadiatu would win a bundle of cash, and then suddenly the book ended. So, please explain yourself.
Okay, one more question before we come over to you, Odelowa.
I am a great fan, a huge fan. My daughter is also a fan. And she was actually told me about this. And I said, bordering things for Lapa people, where can I buy the ticket? And they just told me it's free, go and register. I've read all your books, so has she. And yes, we talked in Nene. My 3rd daughter's name is Kainenechi. So we are asking, what happened? Answer that question. But the question is also about Omelogo. And my husband is a banker. And you mixed friction, and you also talked about Professor Sege, which is a true life story. And I'm wondering, I know you also said you do a lot of research. I would do research into the banking industry and what they do with governors' funds. And I'm intrigued. Was that all true fiction, or was it also a part of research? I want to know. My husband wants to know too.
Thank you, and let's hear the little girl here.
Can we? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Chimamanda Joko from the Wing School, and I wanted to ask, after reading your first novel, Purple Hibiscus, I really wanted to know what happened to Camille, and if she was actually able to go and visit her aunt and cousins in America. That's my first question.
Oh. What's your name?
My name is Chimsley Kenjoko.
Chimso.
Chimsonali Kenjoko.
Chimso.
Nali.
I didn't. Chimso. Oh, Chimso Mali. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for your question. How old are you? You're 11. Well done. I'm very proud of you. Well done. Well done. Well done. So Kambili, I'm going to forget. I'm getting old, so I think we should stop so that I can answer them, and then we'll take. So Kambili, I don't know what happened to Kambili. I did not even know that. Kaya chagudu kainene. I think that she was able to visit them in America. I think Kambili is fine. I don't want you to worry about her, okay? She's fine. I think she wants to say something else.
I heard that you said your first novel was rejected 25 times, and I wanted to ask if there was any way you could help me. I've been trying to write a specific novel, but anytime I give it to anybody to read, they say it's mostly like very fictional, and I should work on the fiction. I should make it more realistic. But anytime I try to make it realistic, it just keeps going back to the way it was. I wanted to ask if there's any advice or how I can get your contact so you can become my mentor.
Biko, kedu onye mụrụ nwa? Kedu onye mụrụ nwa? Biko ka anyị kụọala ya aka. Kedu onye mụrụ nwa?
I think she needs to go and meet her on stage.
This is the next Chimamanda.
This is not.
Now, this is how it started for me. No, but as she comes up, I'll answer your question, which is you just have to keep writing. Don't let people tell you what to write. Yanne. Well done. I'm very proud of you. What class are you in? So you're 11. You're in GSS 3? How can you be 11 in GSS 3? Oh, my Lord. Well done, my darling. Well done. Well done. But can I... Is your mommy here? Where is she? Wow. Well done, mommy. Well done. I'm sure the fathers are saying I did not say well done to the father. The father tried. Well done, mommy. So... Okay, let your mommy come up. So don't let anybody write. When you say, but you have to remember that fiction is realistic. So when you read Purple Hibiscus, you're asking me about Kambili, but she's fictional, but she's also realistic. So don't even when people tell you that, tell them they don't know what they're talking about. The only thing you need to do is to tell your story well. Tell it with detail, make the story interesting, think about what your character looks like, thinks about. When people are telling you realistic, don't pay attention to them. Focus on the story that you're writing. And you're 11, you're young, there's a long time you will become like me. That is my prayer for you. Sure, you will surpass me. Congratulations, mommy. Well done, well done. Okay. Oh. Oh, I love this.
So whenever she got the first signing, Uno can assure you, she got the first signing. All right. Not yet, sir.
So there's a question. Oh, right. I think you asked that question because you suspect that it's based on research. You should, if people who are familiar with Nigerian banking will talk to you honestly about it, I think there's a lot there that they will acknowledge to be true. So yes, I talk to bankers, but of course I'll never tell you who I talk to. But I've always been, and I think your question in some ways is kind of linked to Ike's question. And Omelogo, I feel a little sad that you're unwilling to grant her more grace. Because if the only redeeming thing about her is the obviously redeeming thing, then I think I wanted to write about banking honestly, but I also wanted to write about human contradiction. I wanted to write about human contradiction. And Omelogo, I think, we can understand this kind of longing to become wealthy. And at some point, she's willing to participate in a system that is really dirty, right? But I think that maybe the first redeeming thing is her ability to be honest about, I think a lot of us in this country, people in banking, in other sectors, where there's a lot of corruption, but even the acknowledgement of our participation in that corruption is not something we're willing to do. We find ways to justify it, we find ways to excuse it, and she doesn't. And I like that about that character. I don't think, I'm... Okay, here's a question for you, okay. If that character was a man, do you think your reading of that character might be different? I think so. So perhaps what we are in fact dealing with here is not a fair character analysis, but a manifestation of subtle sexism. Question. But I think it's interesting that you see her as a person who's difficult to reconcile. I think we're full of contradictions. I think I recognize her I wish there were more of her. In other words, I wish more participants in our corrupt system would have her level of self-awareness, but also the courage to say, I no longer want to participate. And her desire, but I think you're being unfair about her desire to study pornography comes from we can say that it might sound, almost sort of titillating in a kind of way, but actually, it's because she really is concerned about the terrible effects of pornography on young people, especially young men. And so it's a very unusual thing to want to study, which I suppose is the point. But it's also, I think, my way of saying that this is an important subject to deal with seriously, because we can look away because it's not socially acceptable. But if you look at the numbers, pornography is consumed at an alarming rate. And by the way, Nigeria ranks number 2, if not number 1. Kadiatu ends with this feeling that she can take back control of her life. Hopefully money will come later, but that's actually what matters, So the pile of cash is not the priority.
Good evening, ma.
Good evening.
Afambojide Kene Atrophy. And I know you grew up in Nsukka, and with the atrophies being your doctor, read about that in your book. I'm a filmmaker, and I wanted to ask you a question because Things Fall Apart for me was also big as film. There are many ways in which we tell stories, So looking at how you, because I don't know what the world says, but how you would rate your books and how successful they've been. Nollywood is struggling with storytelling. And one of the things I would say is we are being encouraged to keep telling our stories without the international aspect to it. So I would say having to imagine your characters or to infuse the dream of the Igbo man or the Igbo woman to go abroad, that is something that I have noticed has been a pattern in some of your work. We can exclude Purple Hibiscus because it was entirely tied around the city in Nsukka. So I would say, what would your advice be for the film industry to be able to travel as we anticipated that it should by now, going by how successful and easily relatable early Nollywood was? What would you say? Would you say that the international aspect of things having to, tie in a little bit more for the world to feel relatable, or what would you advise?
I think questions like this start with the premise that we as Africans are not universal, that we're not at the center. I start with the premise that we are. And I've never believed that we need to water down our stories to be relatable. When I was growing up, I read books set in Russia. I didn't know anything about Russia. I'd never been to Russia. Didn't understand every single thing, but I understood the human story. Today, one of the things I think that Netflix has done well, one of the few things, is that it has brought stories from different parts of the world, and we've seen that, you can watch something set in Argentina that is very Argentinian, that doesn't try to water itself down and become this kind of generic Western story, and we follow it. I think as Nigerians, as Africans, we really need to have more confidence in our storytelling, by which I mean, in some ways like Purple Hibiscus. I was being told nobody's going to understand what you're saying because it's small town Nigeria, you have Igbo words in it. But people did. And I think really it's about telling the story well. I often quarrel with Nollywood, especially Nollywood's depiction of our history, because I think it's often not rooted in proper research. I have a friend who was working on in London, who was working on a historical epic. And I was so impressed by how much research the entire crew did. From the smallest details, like what kind of furniture did they use? And that really matters for authenticity. We've created a caricature of our past, and Nollywood is responsible for it. You bring akachanya, kakasia ifenaru, ewelu coral bead, awukwasa, and then, But how did our people actually look? We haven't done that. We haven't done the work. And so you don't sort of bring out raffia skirts and draw chalk on people's bodies and say this is pre-colonial Igbo land. Nobody is going to believe you because that doesn't come from authenticity. And so the story is not going to travel. I can tell you that a person who tells a very good, authentically done and properly historically based story of pre-colonial Nigeria, that thing will win the Oscar. It will travel. And so this idea that we should, often, and I get different versions of this question. How do you remain yourself in global circles? How did you know that people will read your book without? We should start with the premise that we are at the center. Other people start with that premise. We should start with that premise. We are universal. Our stories are universal. The whole point of literature is that literature is universal despite the differences. The universal story of human beings can be understood by anybody, anywhere. We might not understand the tiny details. When I was reading books set in Russia, I remember, and I was young in Osaka, there are certain words that I was like, I can't even imagine what this thing is. But sometimes just in the context of the story, you create what they imagine. You create it, right? You create it in your own head because of the context of the story. So please, let's, just in general, I think it's so important for us to start with the assumption we are universal. We are universal. We really are. We need to tell our stories with more confidence. With Purple Hibiscus, and at the time I didn't really have a basis for, I didn't have a leg to stand on, in other words, because I was a new writer starting out. But my editor was very keen for me to remove the Igbo words in Purple Hibiscus. And she kept saying, it's going to confuse your American readers. Nobody, it's going to confuse them. It's going to throw them out of the story. And I said, no. And, you have to remember that, now, being fairly well-read and known, I can say no to editors. But then I was just starting out. I was very grateful to have a publisher. But there were certain things on which I just would not bend. And that was one of them, because I felt it was important for the texture of my story. I wanted to portray characters who are like me, which is to say, characters who speak English and Igbo, sometimes at the same time, often in the same sentence, as many of us do. And I think the way to portray that in a story, the way to tell our story with truth, is to do, put that in. And, and I refused. And I said, no, I'm not going to take the words out. And, people all over the world have read that book. The Igbo words are there, and they understand the book. So let's not water down our stories. Our stories are universal as they are. Thank you.
Otelo Juanita.